Hi, Grandma here, and I am reading Snow Treasure by Marie McSwiggan. Um, I will start with chapter 20, but review a little bit about what happened in chapter 19. In chapter 19 and 18, we found out that somebody, one of the Nazi soldiers, has been spying on them, um, where they bury the gold bricks with the snowmen. And they need to find Victor to let him know. The only one who really knows where Victor is Peter's mother. And she has gone down, she has loaded up her toboggan with young children, Bunny and other preschool children. And they are going to go down the mountain. Meanwhile, she has transferred some of the gold bricks to Peter's sled. Peter transferred the gold from the bobsled to his own sled. He gave his mother a start, for he knew he could overtake her whenever he wished. Mrs. Lundstrom sat on the bobsled and steered it skillfully. But with the children on it, she didn't dare take the long stretches with the speed Peter could have made. Down on the beach, he was angry to find his mother the object of much curiosity. Soldiers were filing into the open space before the barracks. Their drill master made them stand at attention when she pulled the long sled past their lines. The drill master froze in stiff salute. Thank that merciful heaven he had not said Heil Hitler, Peter breathed in relief, for she would have had to make some reply, and Peter knew his mother was not the one to praise a man who had brought evil to her country. And yet she would have had to say something if she had refused. Well, anything could have happened. People were sent to concentration camps for as little as that, for failing to exalt the German leader. Peter wanted to tie his sled to the long one to help his mother pull the children over the long level stretch, but she told him to go ahead. "It's the looks of the thing, Peter," she whispered. He was glad he'd gone on when a minute later he heard the voice of the commandant. Peter knew he was addressing his mother, but he dared not turn around to look. He'd been lucky to escape as lightly as he had the day the officer stopped him and asked him if he would like to be a servant. And I do have a picture to show you. And it is a picture of Peter's mother pulling the children on her toboggan, of the soldiers standing at attention, and Peter coming down the hill on his sled. "Good morning, good lady. You a fine day for your sled ride." Peter knew his precise Norwegian accent. His mother made no answer. "If you like, I'll have one of my men pull that sled." He spoke politely. Still his mother was silent. Then from up the beach, Peter could see Lieutenant Sit-Down coming toward him and toward the commandant. He had a paper in his hand. He paid no attention to Peter, but went rapidly toward the chief officer. Peter could just make out the click of his heels as he bowed in salute. He must have handed the paper to the commandant, for there was silence, as if the latter were reading a message. Then the commandant addressed the lieutenant in German. Peter knew only a little German, but he had no difficulty making out what was said. "These Norwegians, have they no manners? There's so many boors. Or is it ears they lack? There was a boy here one day. I offered to let him be my orderly. He acted as if he couldn't hear." Peter dug into the snow as hard as he could. He was that boy. He was afraid the commandant might recognize his back. He reached the cliff that hid the snake. From there, he watched his mother pulling hard on the rope of the bobsled. It seemed to him that she would never arrive at the wall that would hide her from the eyes of those hundreds of Germans. Slowly she traveled over the snow. She had to turn into the valley before Peter dared give her a hand on the rope. "But the snow soldiers are all knocked down," she noted. "That means that Victor and Rolls came out last night and loaded the gold you children brought yesterday. Could you and Helga possibly be mistaken?" So she's calling what we call snowmen the snow soldiers. Helga's nearly always right, Peter spoke ruefully. It was a sore point. Helga had been right and he'd been wrong in many disputes. If Helga says she's seen anything, you can be pretty sure she has. Mrs. Lundstrom had to agree. Helga was known as bright throughout Rysvik. Anyway, I saw a soldier on skis just before we turned into the Holmes farm last night. He would have had to come from here. There's nowhere else he could have come from. In any event, we'll have to tell Uncle Victor so he can be on guard. Now the thing to do is find the boat. Mrs. Lundstrom drew from her pocket a drawing of the snake with the Kling Pearson marked with a cross. But that's right here, she said. Here are the 2 fallen trees. There's no boat here, Peter announced triumphantly. I look for it every day and I've not seen it yet. I think the children will be safe while we look, his mother said. Bunny, you and Dog and Ingrid, build a snow castle, a great big one. Look, I'll help you start it. She dropped on the snow beside them. Peter stood the bobsled on its end. It would screen them a little from the wind. Then he untied the bricks he'd transferred from his mother's sled to his own. These he buried in a drift. In no time at all, a snowman was standing guard over them. And now for the Kling Pearson. And although it was clearly marked on the drawing, there was nothing of it to be seen. Not a spar, not a boom, not a foot of the mast. Only the everlasting snow, the pines, and the jutting cliffs that made pincers around the black rushing stream and its narrow borders of land. Peter and his mother walked to the very edge of the water. In the little wooded strip, they saw a strange new kind of vegetation. The forest seemed to dance. Pines, they thought, rooted in the bank, now seemed to have no roots at all, but were bobbing up and down with the rush of the current. And now that they were in part of the valley where something was amiss, they could see other strange sights. Through the thick brush on the bank, they could just about make out the Kling Pearson. But what a strange Kling Pearson! Pines were growing right out of her hull. Her mast was a towering evergreen. The branches thickened at the crow's nest and then tapered to a stately point. It's a pretty good job of camouflage, don't you think? A voice spoke softly at their side. Both of them jumped in fright. Who do you think it is? Well, we'll see. Chapter 21. It was Uncle Victor who had spoken. It took some minutes for Mrs. Lundstrom and Peter to recover from their astonishment. When they did, they realized they were being shown up a fur-screened gangplank. At its head stood Rolls, the mate, with a hand to help them alight on the dancing deck. But you're not the ones to be surprised, Victor was saying. What about me? I was expecting 2 teams as usual. Instead, I find only you 2 and Bunny as his friends. The Kling Pearson was a fishing smack of 50 tons. She'd been built long before Uncle Victor's time for the herring industry. She carried a sloop rig and could set in a course and square sail, but Uncle Victor had installed a 13-horsepower engine, so the Kling had no need to wait for the wind, but could travel under her own force at all times. When newer and finer boats were built in the shipyards of the coast, people would ask Victor Lundstrom why he didn't get one. "Why do you sail that tub?" they would question, knowing he could afford the finest. To people who spoke in such a fashion, Uncle Victor had little to say, but Peter knew what his uncle thought about the Kling. There never was such a ship in the whole history of navigation, he once told Peter. She's the sturdiest thing afloat, and she's as easy to manage as a kitten. As for capacity, well, for her size, she's the best of anything you've ever heard tell of. Why, I could carry food and fuel for 5 years if I ever decided to make a polar expedition. When Uncle Peter bought the smack years ago, he changed her name. There were those who asked why the name Kling Pearson, but Peter knew why his uncle called the boat he loved after one of his heroes. Cling Pearson was the Norseman who went to America and who, because of his bravery in the face of hardships, was called the Norwegian Daniel Boone. "I'll give you tea, although I didn't expect visitors," Uncle Victor showed them into his cabin. One of the greatest thrills of Peter's childhood was to have tea aboard the Cling. But alas, invitations were hard to get. Uncle Victor was a busy man with his fishing cruise, and the Cling was at sea much of the time. It was also cheery and bright aboard the ship. In the cabin, Peter could see his face reflected in a dozen different surfaces. It was spotless, as only a ship's cabin can be. Leather bunks along two sides served as seats in the daytime. Over one of these were two portholes, darkened now by the camouflage shrubbery outside. But there were peepholes in the shrubbery, and through them came a jagged, broken light. A large round table centered the cabin. It was fastened to the deck, and above it hung a lamp on a chain. About the only other thing of importance was a large map of Europe, as it was in the 1930s. The map was draped with the red field and white-bordered blue cross of the flag of Norway. "And what is the news of Lars?" Victor asked about his brother. "Well, there's little to tell," Mrs. Lundstrom said sadly. "His regiment got to Trondheim, and that's about all we know." "There's been some fierce fighting there." Uncle Victor lit a spirit lamp. He told what he'd been able to learn about the army. His visitors listened eagerly. Then Mrs. Lundstrom explained the purpose of their visit. "We didn't come to make a social call," she said. "I don't dare leave Bunny and the others very long. They may get tired and wander away. We came to warn you that someone may be watching you. Helga Thompson said she heard something and saw someone move down here yesterday. Then Peter saw a German soldier on skis come out of the trail from here that cuts into the road near the homes." Uncle Victor looked grave. "It could have been Rolls or me that Helga saw. We've been watching every move these youngsters made. They haven't come upon that one, or the other of us hasn't stood guard." "Yes, we thought as much," Mrs. Lundstrom said. "We talked of that last night when Herr Holm brought the news. I wouldn't have given a thought if Peter hadn't seen the soldier on skis come out of the trail." Uncle Victor had set the kettle on a spirit lamp and now lifted the lid to see if it was boiling. "You could tell from the snow prints," Peter suggested. "Yes, we could, after a distance, but it's pretty well trampled around here with Rolls and me going out night after night to bring the gold aboard. But one of us will go up the trail tonight and see," his uncle answered. "But the curfew!" Uncle Victor only laughed. He made the tea and poured it and passed the cups to his guests. There were spice cakes that Rolls brought in from the galley. "There's no such thing as being too cautious about spies," Uncle Victor said after a time. "But if anyone had been here in the daylight, surely Rolls or I would have seen him. Of course, I did take 40 winks yesterday afternoon when the children were here. You see, when the two of us dig up and carry on board almost 1,000 pounds of gold, it's pretty late and we're tired. We've things to do in the morning to get ready to sail, so we have to catch up on our sleep when we can. But Rolls was around, weren't you, old fellow?" Yes, I was. But when I saw Peter, I knew everything'd be all right. I'd left my pipe on board, and I came back just long enough to smoke a pipeful." "Then someone could have been around and neither you nor I would have known." "Is there much more gold to load?" Victor asked his sister-in-law with a pause. "No, you have nearly all of it. Per Garson's been checking. The last of next week will finish it, and it won't be 6 weeks until Tuesday. We've been lucky, Victor. Think if the thaws had come earlier." "Well, you can't get it down here too soon to suit me." He stirred his tea. "This business of hanging around isn't exactly safe." "You mean you're ready to sail?" Peter asked. "As soon as the gold's loaded, you can go to America?" "That's right, son. That's exactly what I mean." "Then you know where the mines are laid?" "Oh, sure. I've known that for weeks. When we entered the war on the side of Britain and France. So hurry and get that gold down here so I can be underway. It'll be bad enough for the rest of you if we're caught, but Rolls and I, we would be shot. Uncle Victor. Oh, don't worry. We're not going to get caught. It's too much money to give the Germans. And anyway, I'd like to see New York again. Well, that's interesting. So, the eyes that Helga felt on them and the movement she saw was probably Uncle Victor and Rolls. But that still doesn't explain the soldier on skis. But it sounds like they have a good camouflage if they haven't been discovered yet. Well, we'll have to see. I hope they make it with all the gold before they're discovered. Bye-bye.